On a chill spring morning, May 19, 1536, the Tower of London bore witness to an act as shocking as it was final. The execution of Queen Anne Boleyn, second wife of King Henry VIII. Clad in a simple grey damask gown, her dark hair bound beneath a coif, Anne ascended a scaffold draped in black, her steps steady despite the weight of her fate. Moments later, a French swordsman, summoned for his precision, delivered a single, swift stroke, severing her head and ending a life that had burned brightly in the crucible of Tudor England. Charged with adultery, incest, and high treason, accusations, now widely believed to have been fabricated, Anne's death was not merely the fall of a queen, but a seismic moment that reshaped the religious and political contours of a nation. Her execution, a calculated act of erasure, sent ripples across Europe, cementing her legacy as one of history's most enigmatic and tragic figures. Anne Boleyn's story is a vivid tapestry of ambition, brilliance, and betrayal, woven against the backdrop of a court where power was both a prize and a peril. As the woman who captivated Henry VIII and spurred him to defy the Pope, she was a catalyst for the English Reformation, her marriage severing England's ties with Rome and ushering in an era of religious transformation. Yet her failure to produce a male heir, coupled with her sharp wit and unyielding demeanor, made her a lightning rod for enmity in a patriarchal world. Her downfall, orchestrated by Thomas Cromwell and sanctioned by a king whose ardor had cooled, was a masterstroke of political machination that revealed the ruthless undercurrents of the Tudor court. Born around 1501, though some chronicles suggest 1507, Anne was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, a seasoned diplomat, and Elizabeth Howard, of the illustrious Howard family. Her early years at Hever Castle in Kent were marked by privilege, but it was her education abroad that set her apart. Sent to the courts of the Netherlands and France, she served under Margaret of Austria and Queen Claude, immersing herself in the intellectual ferment of the Renaissance. Fluent in French, skilled in music, and drawn to the ideas of religious reform, Anne emerged as a woman of rare sophistication and conviction, qualities that would both elevate her to the throne and render her vulnerable to her enemies. Returning to England in 1522, Anne's arrival at the Tudor court was nothing short of electrifying. Her striking presence, dark eyes, graceful poise, and a mind as sharp as her tongue captivated Henry VIII, whose marriage to Catherine of Aragon was faltering under the strain of producing a male heir. Unlike her sister Mary, a former royal mistress, Anne refused to be a mere paramour, insisting on marriage in a bold gambit that altered the course of English history. The king's great matter, Henry's quest to annul his marriage to Catherine, pitted him against the Pope, leading to England's break with Rome and the establishment of the Church of England. Anne's ambition and her sympathy for reformist ideas made her a formidable ally in this upheaval, but they also sowed the seeds of her destruction. Her coronation on June 1, 1533, was a spectacle of triumph, with Anne processing through London in a blaze of crimson and gold. Yet, beneath the pageantry, cracks were already forming. The English people, fiercely loyal to Catherine, branded Anne a usurper, and her assertive demeanor alienated many nobles. The birth of her daughter, Elizabeth, in September 1533, was a bitter disappointment to Henry, who craved a son to secure his dynasty. Subsequent miscarriages, including one of a male fetus in January 1536, eroded his affection and emboldened her detractors. As Anne's influence waned, her enemies, led by Thomas Cromwell, saw an opportunity to strike. By April 1536, Cromwell, once an ally, had turned against Anne, his pragmatic ambitions clashing with her reformist zeal and her influence over the king. Seizing on Henry's burgeoning affection for Jane Seymour, a demure lady-in-waiting, Cromwell wove a web of accusations, transforming court gossip into charges of heinous crimes. On May 2nd, Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower, accused of adultery with 5 men, including her brother George Boleyn, and plotting Henry's death. Her trial, presided over by her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, was a travesty of justice, relying on hearsay and coerced confessions. Found guilty, Anne was sentenced to death. her fate sealed by a king eager to move on. Anne's final days in the Tower were a study in resilience. She prayed, wrote poignant letters, and prepared her soul for eternity, all while maintaining a dignity that left observers in awe. Her execution, carried out with chilling efficiency, stunned contemporaries, from the Spanish ambassador Eustace Chapuis, who chronicled her courage despite his disdain, to chronicler Edward Hall, who noted the speed with which Henry wed Jane Seymour. Anne's death paved the way for a new queen, but her legacy endured through her daughter, Elizabeth, who would become one of England's greatest monarchs. This narrative seeks to illuminate Anne Boleyn's life, trial, and execution with the depth and precision of a historical account. Drawing on contemporary sources, such as Chapuis' dispatches and Hall's chronicles, alongside modern scholarship, we will explore the forces that shaped her rise and fall. Anne's story is a lens through which to view the volatility of the Tudor court, where love could turn to loathing and power was a fleeting illusion. Her execution, a moment of horror and spectacle, remains a testament to the perils of ambition and the enduring power of a woman who, even in death, refused to be forgotten. Anne Boleyn, born circa 1501 at Hever Castle in Kent, entered the world as the second daughter of Thomas Boleyn and Elizabeth Howard, a union that blended ambition with noble lineage. The exact date of her birth remains a matter of scholarly debate, with some sources suggesting 1507, but the earlier date aligns more closely with the timeline of her education and rise to prominence. Thomas Boleyn, a skilled diplomat and courtier, was a man of considerable ambition, his star rising in the early Tudor court under Henry VII and later Henry VIII. Elizabeth Howard, daughter of the Duke of Norfolk, brought the prestige of one of England's most powerful families, endowing Anne with a heritage that would shape her aspirations and her enemies. Hever Castle, a fortified manor nestled in the Kentish countryside, was the cradle of Anne's early years. Though not born to royalty, she was raised in an environment of privilege, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and the expectations of social advancement. Her father's diplomatic postings and her mother's noble connections ensured that Anne and her siblings, Mary and George, were groomed for roles far beyond the provincial gentry. From an early age, Anne displayed a keen intellect and a spirited disposition, traits that would later define her as both a captivating courtier and a polarizing figure. The Boleyn family's ascent was emblematic of the fluidity of the early Tudor social order, where talent and opportunism could elevate a family to the highest echelons of power. Thomas Boleyn's fluency in French and his diplomatic acumen earned him favor, while Elizabeth's Howard lineage opened doors to the aristocracy. Yet, it was Anne's unique education and experiences abroad that would set her apart, forging a woman whose sophistication and ambition would both dazzle and threaten the Tudor court. In 1513, at approximately 12 years of age, Anne embarked on a transformative journey that would shape her character and destiny. Her father secured her a place in the household of Margaret of Austria, regent of the Netherlands and one of the most cultured women in Europe. Margaret's court at Mechlin was a crucible of Renaissance learning, where music, poetry, and intellectual discourse flourished. Anne, as a young attendant, was immersed in this vibrant environment, learning French, refining her manners, and absorbing the ideals of courtly grace. Margaret, a patron of scholars and artists, took a liking to Anne, noting her quick wit and aptitude for languages, qualities that would later become her hallmark. By 1514, Anne's education continued in France, where she joined the household of Queen Mary, Henry VIII's sister, who had married Louis XIII. When Louis died in 1515, Anne remained in France, serving Queen Claude, wife of Francis III. The French court was a dazzling contrast to the more austere English court, steeped in the opulence of the Renaissance and the intrigues of diplomacy. Anne's time in France, which lasted nearly 7 years, was a formative period. She mastered the French language, learned the art of dance and music, and became conversant in the theological debates that were beginning to challenge Catholic orthodoxy. Her exposure to reformist ideas, particularly those of French humanists, like Jacques Lefebvre d'Etaples, planted seeds of religious curiosity that would later align her with the English Reformation. Anne's education was not merely academic but social and political. She observed the dynamics of power, the subtleties of courtly flirtation, and the strategies women employed to navigate a male-dominated world. Her time in France also honed her distinctive style. Her elegant attire, inspired by French fashion, emphasized her slender frame and dark eyes, setting her apart from the fair-haired ideal of English beauty. By the time she returned to England, Anne was not merely a well-educated young woman but a cosmopolitan figure, poised to make an indelible mark on the Tudor court. In 1522, Anne returned to England, summoned back by her father to marry James, Butler, heir to the Ormond title, a match intended to resolve a family dispute. The marriage negotiations faltered, but Anne's arrival at the English court marked the beginning of her ascent. At approximately 21, she was no longer the child who had left Hever Castle but a polished and confident woman, her French upbringing lending her an air of exotic allure. Her debut at a court masque in March 1522, where she performed as Perseverance in a choreographed dance, showcased her grace and charisma, drawing the attention of courtiers and soon the king himself. The Tudor court under Henry VIII was a glittering but treacherous stage where ambition and favor could elevate or destroy. Anne quickly distinguished herself not only for her beauty, described by contemporaries as striking rather than conventionally fair, but for her wit and intellectual vigor. She was fluent in French, skilled in music and poetry, and unafraid to engage in spirited debate, qualities that set her apart in a court accustomed to more demure ladies-in-waiting. Her sister Mary, already known as a former mistress of Henry, provided a cautionary example of the fleeting nature of royal favor, and Anne was determined to chart a different course. By the mid-1520s, Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was under strain. Married since 1509, the couple had produced only one surviving child, Princess Mary, and Henry's desperation for a male heir grew acute. Catherine, nearing 40 and past her childbearing years, could no longer fulfill the king's dynastic ambitions. Anne's presence at court, vibrant and unattainable, ignited Henry's passion. Unlike Mary, who had succumbed to the king's advances, Anne refused to become his mistress, a decision rooted in both ambition and principle. Her insistence on marriage was a bold gamble, one that would reshape England's destiny. Henry's pursuit of Anne, which began in earnest around 1526, coincided with his growing conviction that his marriage to Catherine was cursed. Citing Leviticus 20:21, which condemned marriage to a brother's widow, Catherine had been married to Henry's brother Arthur. He sought an annulment from Pope Clement VII. This quest, known as the King's Great Matter, plunged England into a diplomatic and religious crisis. Anne, aware of the stakes, became not only the object of Henry's desire but an active participant in his campaign, encouraging his interest in reformist texts and advocating for a break with Rome. Anne's influence during this period was profound. She introduced Henry to works like William Tyndale's The Obedience of a Christian Man, which argued for royal supremacy over the Church, aligning with her own reformist sympathies. Her role as a political partner, not merely a romantic interest, distinguished her from other royal consorts. Yet her assertiveness and her status as a new woman in a conservative court earned her enemies, including powerful figures like Cardinal Wolsey, who saw her as a threat to his influence. By 1529, with Wolsey's failure to secure the annulment, Henry's frustration mounted. The fall of Wolsey and the rise of Thomas Cromwell, a pragmatic lawyer with reformist leanings, shifted the balance in Anne's favor. Cromwell's legal acumen and willingness to defy Rome paved the way for the Act of Supremacy, which declared Henry the supreme head of the Church of England. In January 1533, Anne and Henry were secretly married, likely in a private ceremony at Whitehall Palace. Anne was already pregnant, and the urgency to legitimize their union was paramount. On June 1, 1533, Anne was crowned queen in a lavish ceremony at Westminster Abbey. Clad in crimson and ermine, she processed through London, her dark eyes gleaming with triumph. The coronation, orchestrated by Cromwell, was a spectacle of royal propaganda, but it failed to win the hearts of the English people, who remained loyal to Catherine and viewed Anne as a usurper. Her enemies among the nobility, including the Duke of Suffolk and members of the old Catholic aristocracy, whispered of her ambition and her heretical leanings. The birth of Elizabeth on September 7, 1533, was a moment of joy but also disappointment, as Henry had hoped for a son. Anne's position, though seemingly secure, was precarious. Her failure to produce a male heir, coupled with her sharp tongue and willingness to challenge courtiers, alienated key allies. Her reformist sympathies, while aligning her with Cromwell and Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, made her a target for those who opposed the break with Rome. As her reign progressed, the seeds of her downfall were sown, her enemies waiting for an opportunity to strike. This chapter in Anne Boleyn's life, from her formative years in Europe to her coronation as queen, reveals a woman of extraordinary ambition and intellect, whose rise to power was as remarkable as it was fraught. Her education, her strategic refusal to be a mistress, and her role in the Reformation positioned her as a transformative figure, but they also made her a lightning rod for controversy. The stage was set for the tragedy that would unfold, as the very qualities that elevated her would prove her undoing in the ruthless arena of the Tudor court. By early 1536, the Tudor court was a crucible of ambition, suspicion, and shifting alliances, where the favor of King Henry VIII could elevate or destroy in an instant. Anne Boleyn, crowned queen less than 3 years prior, stood at the pinnacle of power, yet her position was increasingly precarious. Her failure to produce a male heir, coupled with her assertive demeanor and reformist sympathies, had eroded the king's affection and emboldened her enemies. The court, a glittering stage of pageantry and intrigue, was now a battleground where political survival demanded cunning, loyalty, and the ability to anticipate the king's whims. It was in this volatile atmosphere that the seeds of Anne's downfall were sown, cultivated by those who saw her as an obstacle to their own ambitions or the stability of the realm. The year 1536 marked a turning point in Anne's fortunes. The birth of her daughter Elizabeth in September 1533 had been a bitter disappointment to Henry, who had staked his dynastic hopes on a son. Subsequent miscarriages, particularly one in January 1536, when Anne lost a male fetus at approximately 15 weeks, deepened the king's disillusionment. The loss was not merely personal, but political, as it fueled whispers that Anne was unfit to secure the Tudor succession. Her enemies, sensing vulnerability, began to circle, their machinations coalescing around a figure who would prove to be her most formidable adversary, Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister. Thomas Cromwell, a man of humble origins who had risen to become Henry's most trusted advisor, was a master of political strategy. His pragmatic approach to governance and his role in orchestrating England's break with Rome had made him indispensable to the king. Yet by 1536, his relationship with Anne had soured. Initially allies in their shared support for religious reform, the two had diverged on key issues. Anne's commitment to evangelical causes, such as the redistribution of monastic wealth to charitable ends, clashed with Cromwell's vision of channeling those resources into the royal treasury. Her influence over Henry, particularly in matters of foreign policy, further strained their alliance, as Anne favored closer ties with France, while Cromwell leaned toward an alliance with the Holy Roman Empire. Cromwell's ambition was matched by his ruthlessness. He understood the fragility of power in the Tudor court and recognized that Anne's waning favor presented an opportunity. By early 1536, Henry's attention had turned to Jane Seymour, a demure and unassuming lady-in-waiting whose meekness contrasted sharply with Anne's fiery independence. Jane, supported by her ambitious brothers and conservative factions at court, became a pawn in a larger game. Cromwell saw in her a means to supplant Anne, securing his own position and aligning the court with his diplomatic and financial goals. The stage was set for a campaign of unprecedented audacity, one that would transform court gossip into a deadly weapon. In April 1536, Cromwell launched a clandestine investigation into Anne's conduct, leveraging the court's rumor mill to devastating effect. The Tudor court was rife with whispers of Anne's flirtatious banter and her familiarity with male courtiers, behavior that, while not unusual in the context of courtly love, could be twisted to suggest impropriety. Cromwell's agents, acting with meticulous precision, gathered testimonies that would form the basis of charges so heinous they would shock the realm: adultery with 5 men, including her brother George Boleyn, and high treason for allegedly plotting the king's death. The accusations were a masterstroke of political theater, designed to inflame Henry's jealousy and justify Anne's removal. The men implicated: Henry Norris, a trusted courtier and groom of the stool; William Brereton, a Cheshire gentleman; Francis Weston, a young favorite; Mark Smeaton, a lowly musician; and George Boleyn, Viscount Rochford, were carefully chosen. Their proximity to Anne, whether through courtly interactions or familial ties, lent plausibility to the charges, while their diverse statuses ensured that the accusations cast a wide net, implicating Anne in a web of moral and political corruption. Mark Smeaton, the only commoner among the accused, was the first to crack under pressure. Subjected to intense interrogation, possibly torture, he confessed to having been Anne's lover, a claim that provided Cromwell with the leverage he needed to press forward. The other men, all of higher rank, denied the charges, but their fates were sealed by the weight of Smeaton's confession and the king's growing conviction of Anne's guilt. The charge of incest with her brother George was particularly shocking, designed to vilify Anne as a moral abomination and ensure public outrage. Contemporary sources, such as the letters of Eustace Chapuis, the Spanish ambassador, suggest that even Anne's detractors found the accusations difficult to believe, yet the momentum of Cromwell's campaign was unstoppable. On May 2, 1536, Anne was arrested at Greenwich Palace, an event that stunned the court. The timing was deliberate, coinciding with a public event, a May Day joust, where Anne's absence would be conspicuous. Escorted by barge to the Tower of London, she entered through the Traitor's Gate, a grim symbol of her fall from grace. Contemporary accounts describe her as bewildered yet defiant, questioning the reasons for her arrest and proclaiming her innocence. Her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, and other members of the Privy Council oversaw her confinement, ensuring that she was isolated from potential allies. In the Tower, Anne was housed in the same royal apartments she had occupied during her coronation, a cruel irony that underscored her precipitous fall. Her behavior during these early days of captivity oscillated between despair and resolve. She wrote letters, prayed fervently, and sought to understand the charges against her. One surviving letter, purportedly written to Henry, pleads her innocence and begs for mercy, though its authenticity remains debated among historians. The letter, if genuine, reveals a woman grappling with betrayal, yet clinging to her dignity in the face of overwhelming odds. The arrests of the accused men followed swiftly. Henry Norris, William Brereton, Francis Weston, and George Boleyn were all imprisoned in the Tower, their fates intertwined with Anne's. Mark Smeaton, already broken by interrogation, remained the prosecution's key witness, his confession providing a veneer of credibility to the charges. The speed and secrecy of the arrests underscored Cromwell's determination to prevent any countermoves by Anne's supporters, few though they were by this point. Anne's trial, held on May 15, 1536, in the Great Hall of the Tower of London, was a spectacle designed to affirm her guilt and legitimize her punishment. Presided over by her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, and a panel of 26 peers, the proceedings were a masterclass in political theater. The prosecution, led by Cromwell's allies, presented a case built on hearsay, coerced confessions, and dubious timelines. Smeaton's confession was the cornerstone, supplemented by vague allegations of Anne's immoral behavior and supposed conversations about the king's death. Anne defended herself with remarkable eloquence, dismantling the inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. She denied the charges of adultery and treason, pointing out the lack of credible witnesses and the implausibility of the timelines. For instance, several of the alleged adulterous encounters were said to have occurred at times when Anne was either pregnant or recovering from childbirth, rendering the accusations logistically absurd. Her brother George, tried separately, was equally defiant, mocking the evidence against him with biting wit. Yet the trial was not about justice, but about fulfilling the king's will. The jury, composed of men beholden to Henry or hostile to Anne, delivered a unanimous guilty verdict. The charges of treason were particularly damning, as they accused Anne of plotting Henry's death, an act that struck at the heart of the monarchy. The evidence for this charge was flimsy, relying on alleged conversations about the king's mortality, which were twisted to suggest intent. The inclusion of incest, a charge almost unheard of in royal circles, was designed to shock and dehumanize Anne, ensuring that her execution would be seen as justified. The sentence pronounced by Norfolk was death by burning or beheading, at the king's discretion, a grim formality, as Henry had already decided her fate. The trials of the accused men followed swiftly with similar outcomes. Mark Smeaton, having confessed, was sentenced to death, while Norris, Brereton, Weston, and George Boleyn maintained their innocence, but were convicted nonetheless. On May 17, 1536, the 5 men were executed on Tower Hill, their deaths a prelude to Anne's own. George's execution, in particular, was a blow to Anne, as their close sibling bond had been a source of strength. The speed of the proceedings, less than 2 weeks from arrest to execution, reflected Cromwell's urgency to eliminate any chance of reprieve. Anne's fate now rested on Henry's decision. Eager to erase her from history and clear the way for his marriage to Jane Seymour, he opted for beheading, a relatively merciful choice compared to burning. To ensure a swift and clean execution, he imported a skilled swordsman from Calais, sparing Anne the brutality of the axe. As Anne awaited her fate in the Tower, the court moved forward with chilling efficiency, preparing for a new queen even as the old one faced death. This chapter in Anne Boleyn's story reveals the ruthless machinery of the Tudor court, where power was maintained through fear, manipulation, and spectacle. Cromwell's campaign, fueled by political ambition and Henry's fickle affections, transformed whispers into a death sentence, exploiting Anne's vulnerabilities and the court's prejudices. Her trial, a travesty of justice, underscored the fragility of her position and the ease with which a queen could be cast aside. Yet, even in the face of such betrayal, Anne's courage and eloquence shone through, setting the stage for her final act of defiance on the scaffold. On May 2, 1536, Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, was escorted through the Traitors' Gate of the Tower of London, her once glorious ascent to the throne reduced to a grim procession under guard. The irony of her confinement was stark. She was housed in the same royal apartments within the Tower where she had stayed during her coronation less than 3 years earlier. Now, those chambers, once adorned for celebration, served as her prison, their stone walls echoing with the weight of her impending fate. Arrested on charges of adultery, incest, and high treason, Anne faced a reality that was both surreal and terrifying, her world unraveling with a speed that left her reeling yet resolute. Anne's time in the Tower, spanning just over 2 weeks, was a period of intense emotional and spiritual turmoil. Contemporary accounts, including the observations of Sir William Kingston, the Constable of the Tower, paint a picture of a woman oscillating between despair and defiance. She spent her days in prayer, seeking solace in her faith, which had been shaped by her exposure to reformist ideas in France and her patronage of evangelical scholars in England. Her religious convictions, once a source of strength in her role as a reformist queen, now offered comfort as she prepared for death. She was attended by a small group of ladies, including some who were hostile to her, their presence a constant reminder of her isolation. Anne's behavior during her imprisonment revealed her complex character. At times, she was overcome with emotion, weeping for her daughter, Elizabeth, and lamenting the betrayal of those she had trusted. At others, she displayed a sharp wit and unyielding spirit, questioning the validity of the charges against her and expressing bewilderment at the king's actions. A letter, purportedly written by Anne to Henry VIII from the Tower, survives in some historical records, though its authenticity is debated. In it, she passionately defends her innocence, writing, "Try me, good king, but let me have a lawful trial, and let not my sworn enemies sit as my accusers and judges." Whether genuine or not, the letter captures the essence of Anne's defiance, her refusal to accept the narrative of guilt imposed upon her. Her interactions with Kingston and Her attendants were marked by moments of poignant humanity. She spoke of her fear of pain, expressing relief when informed that her execution would be carried out by a skilled swordsman rather than the crude axe typically used for traitors. She also reflected on her legacy, expressing hope that her daughter would be cared for and that her contributions to the Reformation would endure. These moments, recorded by Kingston, reveal a woman grappling with mortality while clinging to her dignity and faith. Before Anne's own execution, the men accused, alongside her, faced their fates. On May 17, 1536, Henry Norris, William Brereton, Francis Weston, Mark Smeaton, and George Boleyn, Anne's brother, were executed on Tower Hill, a public site just outside the tower's walls. The speed of their trials and executions, less than 2 weeks after their arrests, underscored the urgency with which Thomas Cromwell and Henry VIII sought to eliminate any trace of the alleged conspiracy. The men, with the exception of Smeaton, maintained their innocence to the end, their deaths serving as a grim prelude to Anne's own. George Boleyn's execution was particularly devastating for Anne. As her brother and closest confidant, George, had been a steadfast ally in the treacherous world of the court. His trial, like Anne's, was a mockery of justice, relying on the same flimsy evidence and coerced confessions. On the scaffold, George delivered a brief speech, proclaiming his loyalty to the king and urging others to learn from his fate. His death, witnessed by a crowd of onlookers, was a stark reminder of the personal cost of Anne's downfall, as the charges of incest had not only vilified her, but also destroyed her family. The executions of the other men, Norris, a trusted courtier, Brereton, a regional power broker, Weston, a young favorite, and Smeaton, the musician whose confession had fueled the charges, further isolated Anne. Each death tightened the noose around her, as the court and the public were primed to accept her guilt. The Spanish ambassador, Eustace Chapuis, a vocal critic of Anne, noted the efficiency of the proceedings, writing that the king's determination to rid himself of his second wife was evident in the swiftness of the executions. Yet, even Chapuis, no friend to Anne, remarked on the lack of credible evidence, suggesting that the charges were driven more by politics than truth. As Anne awaited her fate, Henry VIII made preparations that revealed both his pragmatism and his desire to erase her from history. Recognizing the need for a swift and dignified execution to avoid further scandal, he rejected the traditional method of beheading by axe, which could be botched and prolong suffering. Instead, he imported a skilled swordsman from Calais, a French territory under English control, known for his precision. This decision, while merciful in comparison to burning, the alternative sentence, was also a calculated move to distance the execution from the brutality associated with common traitors. Anne was informed of the king's decision, and contemporary accounts suggest she expressed relief at the prospect of a quick death. She reportedly remarked to Kingston, "I hear he is a good man with a sword, and my neck is small," a comment that blended dark humor with stoic acceptance. Her composure in these final days impressed those around her, even those who had been hostile. She spent hours in prayer, receiving the sacrament and preparing her soul for eternity, her faith a bulwark against the fear and uncertainty of her impending death. Meanwhile, the court moved forward with chilling efficiency. On May 14, 1536, just before her trial, Henry's marriage to Anne was annulled by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, who declared it invalid on grounds of a supposed pre-contract with Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, from years earlier. This annulment, a legal maneuver to delegitimize Anne's queenship and Elizabeth's claim to the throne, underscored the king's determination to sever all ties with her. By May 18th, preparations were underway for Henry's betrothal to Jane Seymour, a stark indication of how swiftly Anne was being erased from the royal narrative. On the morning of May 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn emerged from her apartments in the Tower, her demeanor calm and resolute. She was dressed in a gray damask gown with a crimson kirtle, colors that symbolized both mourning and martyrdom. Her dark hair was bound beneath a coif, and she wore a simple headdress, eschewing the grandeur of her coronation. Escorted by Sir William Kingston and a small retinue, she walked to a scaffold erected on the Tower Green, a private enclosure reserved for high-status executions, sparing her the public spectacle of Tower Hill. A crowd of courtiers, officials, and foreign dignitaries had gathered, their presence a mix of curiosity and obligation. Notably absent was Henry VIII, who was already distancing himself from the event, reportedly spending the day hunting at Richmond. The scaffold, draped in black cloth, stood as a stark symbol of Anne's fall, its simplicity contrasting with the opulence of her coronation. A small cushion awaited her for kneeling, and the French swordsman, clad in black, stood ready with his blade, a weapon of such sharpness it was said to require no second stroke. Anne ascended the scaffold with grace, her movements deliberate. She addressed the crowd in a clear, steady voice, her words carefully chosen to affirm her loyalty, while avoiding direct confrontation with the king's justice. According to Edward Hall's chronicle, she spoke as follows: "Good Christian, people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that, whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. And to me, he was ever a good, a gentle and sovereign lord." Her speech, a masterful blend of humility and defiance, avoided challenging the verdict while subtly asserting her innocence, ensuring that her final words would resonate with posterity. Anne then removed her headdress and knelt on the cushion, her eyes fixed on the heavens. She refused a blindfold, choosing to face her fate directly. The swordsman, positioned behind her, called for his sword, a distraction that allowed him to strike swiftly. With a single blow, the blade severed her head, and Anne Boleyn's life ended in an instant. Her body slumped forward, blood pooling on the scaffold, as the crowd stood in stunned silence. There was no pomp or ceremony for Anne's burial. Her body was hastily placed in an arrow chest, a makeshift coffin due to the lack of a prepared one, and carried to the nearby chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the tower. There she was, buried without a marker, her grave a silent testament to her erasure from the royal narrative. The speed of her burial, like the execution itself, reflected Henry's desire to move forward, his attention already fixed on Jane Seymour. On May 20th, 1536, the day after Anne's execution, Henry announced his betrothal to Jane, whom he married 10 days later. The court, ever adaptable, shifted its allegiance to the new queen, whose demure demeanor was a stark contrast to Anne's fiery presence. Chapuis reported that the king showed great joy at his new marriage, a sentiment that underscored the callousness with which Anne's life had been discarded. The public, while shocked by the speed of events, largely accepted the narrative of Anne's guilt, shaped by the propaganda of Cromwell and the court. Anne's execution sent shockwaves through Europe, reinforcing Henry VIII's reputation as a monarch capable of ruthless decisiveness. Foreign ambassadors, including Chapuis, wrote of the event with a mix of horror and fascination, noting the unprecedented nature of a queen's execution. In England, the event deepened divisions between reformist and conservative factions, as Anne's death removed a key advocate for evangelical change. Her supporters, including Archbishop Cranmer, were devastated but powerless to act, while her enemies, led by Cromwell, consolidated their influence. The execution also had profound personal consequences. Elizabeth, Anne's daughter, was declared illegitimate and removed from the line of succession, her future uncertain at the age of 2. The Boleyn family, once ascendant, was shattered, with Anne's parents retreating from court and her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, distancing himself from her memory. Yet the seeds of Anne's legacy remained, as Elizabeth would one day ascend the throne, proving her mother's enduring impact. This chapter in Anne Boleyn's story is a stark portrait of a queen stripped of power, facing death with courage and dignity. Her final days in the Tower, the execution of her alleged co-conspirators, and the chilling efficiency of her own death reveal the brutal realities of the Tudor court, where loyalty was fleeting and justice was a tool of power. Anne's execution was not merely the end of a life but a turning point in English history, marking the triumph of political expediency over truth and setting the stage for the enduring legacy of a woman who refused to be forgotten. The execution of Anne Boleyn on May 19, 1536, marked a cataclysmic moment in the Tudor court. Its reverberations felt not only in England, but across the courts of Europe. With her death, King Henry VIII sought to erase her presence, swiftly moving to marry Jane Seymour on May 30, 1536, just 11 days after Anne's head fell. The speed of this transition, orchestrated with chilling efficiency by Thomas Cromwell, underscored the ruthless pragmatism of the Tudor monarchy. Anne's name was struck from official records, her portraits destroyed or hidden, and her daughter, Elizabeth, declared illegitimate, stripped of her place in the line of succession. Yet, despite these efforts to obliterate her memory, Anne's influence persisted, her life and death leaving an indelible mark on England's religious, political, and cultural landscape. The immediate aftermath of Anne's execution was a period of consolidation for Henry's regime. Jane Seymour, whose demure demeanor contrasted sharply with Anne's fiery independence, was presented as the ideal consort, her role to unify a court fractured by the controversies of Anne's reign. Jane's brief tenure as queen, culminating in the birth of Edward VI in 1537, temporarily stabilized the Tudor succession, fulfilling Henry's desperate quest for a male heir. However, Jane's death shortly after childbirth left the king once again without a consort, and the political vacuum that followed highlighted the fragility of Henry's dynastic ambitions. Anne's absence, far from erasing her impact, cast a long shadow over the court, as her reformist allies and enemies alike grappled with the consequences of her fall. The Boleyn family, once a rising force in the Tudor hierarchy, was shattered. Thomas Boleyn, Anne's father, retreated to Hever Castle, his ambitions crushed and his influence diminished. Elizabeth Howard, Anne's mother, died in 1538, her health possibly broken by the loss of her children, Anne and George, whose executions had tarnished the family's name. The Duke of Norfolk, Anne's uncle, distanced himself from her memory, aligning with the conservative factions that had opposed her reformist agenda. Yet, the very reforms Anne had championed, the break with Rome, the establishment of the Church of England, and the spread of evangelical ideas, continued to shape England's trajectory, proving that her influence could not be so easily erased. Anne Boleyn's legacy is perhaps most profoundly felt in her contributions to the English Reformation, a movement that fundamentally altered England's religious identity. While Anne was not a theologian, her exposure to reformist ideas during her time in France and her patronage of evangelical scholars positioned her as a key figure in the early stages of England's break with Rome. She introduced Henry to works, such as William Tyndale's The Obedience of a Christian Man, which argued for royal supremacy over the Church, and supported figures like Thomas Cromwell, who became Archbishop of Canterbury and a leading architect of the Reformation. Anne's advocacy for the redistribution of monastic wealth to charitable causes, though at odds with Cromwell's fiscal priorities, reflected her commitment to a reformed church that prioritized education and social welfare. Her personal copy of Tyndale's New Testament, inscribed with her own hand, survives as a testament to her engagement with evangelical thought. While her enemies branded her a heretic, her influence helped lay the groundwork for the dissolution of the monasteries and the establishment of a national church under royal control. The annulment of her marriage, declared just days before her execution, was a legal maneuver to delegitimize her role as queen, but it could not undo the structural changes she had helped set in motion. The Act of Supremacy, passed in 1534, declared Henry the supreme head of the Church of England, a direct result of the crisis precipitated by his desire to marry Anne. Her execution, ironically, strengthened the resolve of reformist figures like Cranmer, who mourned her loss but continued to advance the cause she had championed. In this sense, Anne's death, while a personal tragedy, did not halt the momentum of the Reformation, but rather cemented its place in English governance. Anne's most enduring legacy was her daughter, Elizabeth, born on September 7, 1533. At Wine, the time of Anne's execution, Elizabeth was a mere 2.5 years old, declared illegitimate and relegated to a precarious position at court. Yet Elizabeth's eventual ascension to the throne in 1558 as Elizabeth I, one of England's Greatest Monarchs stands as a powerful vindication of Anne's life. Elizabeth inherited her mother's intelligence, charisma, and political acumen, qualities that would define her 45-year reign, often regarded as England's golden age. Elizabeth's reign bore the imprint of Anne's influence in subtle but profound ways. Her commitment to a moderate Protestantism, balancing reformist zeal with political pragmatism, echoed Anne's evangelical sympathies. Elizabeth's court, like her mother's, was a center of intellectual and cultural vibrancy, fostering the Renaissance in England through patronage of the arts and literature. Her refusal to marry, while driven by her own experiences and political calculations, may have been informed by the cautionary tale of her mother's fate, where marriage to a king led to both power and peril. Elizabeth rarely spoke of her mother, a silence likely born of political necessity in a court still shaped by Catholic and conservative factions. Yet, subtle tributes to Anne endured. Elizabeth wore a ring containing a miniature portrait of her mother, a private acknowledgement of their bond. Her policies, particularly her consolidation of the Church of England, built on the foundations laid during Anne's brief reign. MBT. This way, Anne's vision for a reformed England found its fullest expression through her daughter, whose rule transformed England into a major European power. In the immediate aftermath of her death, Anne's reputation was shaped by her enemies. Catholic propagandists such as Nicholas Sander portrayed her as a scheming seductress, attributing to her physical deformities and moral corruption, claims that have been debunked by modern historians. Eustace Chapuis, the Spanish ambassador, while critical of Anne, acknowledged her courage and intelligence, even as he perpetuated the narrative of her guilt. These early accounts, colored by religious and political biases, cast Anne as a villain, a perception that persisted for centuries. The Elizabethan era, however, saw a gradual rehabilitation of Anne's image. As Elizabeth's reign brought stability and glory to England, historians and chroniclers began to view Anne with greater sympathy, recognizing her role in the Reformation and her influence on her daughter. By the 19th century, romanticized portrayals of Anne as a tragic heroine emerged, with writers like Agnes Strickland emphasizing her intelligence and resilience. The 20th century saw a further shift, as feminist scholars reevaluated Anne as a woman who navigated a patriarchal world with remarkable agency, only to be undone by its constraints. In popular culture, Anne Boleyn has become an enduring figure. Her story retold in novels, plays, films, and television series. Works such as The Other Boleyn Girl by Philippa Gregory and the television series The Tudors have brought her to new audiences, though often with dramatic license that embellishes her life. These portrayals, while not always historically accurate, reflect the fascination with Anne as a symbol of ambition, tragedy, and resilience. Her image as a proto-feminist, challenging the gender norms of her time, resonates in modern interpretations, casting her as a woman ahead of her era. Anne Boleyn's life and death encapsulate the paradox of power in the Tudor court, where ambition could elevate a woman to unimaginable heights, but also expose her to unimaginable risks. Her execution was a stark reminder of the precariousness of favor in a world governed by a king whose whims were law. Yet, her legacy transcends the tragedy of her end, as her influence on the Reformation and her daughter's reign reshaped England's destiny. Anne was neither the saint nor the sinner her contemporaries portrayed, but a complex figure whose intelligence, charisma, and determination left an indelible mark on history. The Tudor court, with its blend of splendor and savagery, was a microcosm of the forces that shaped Anne's fate. Her rise from a courtier's daughter to a queen was a testament to her agency, but her fall revealed the limits of that agency in a world dominated by men. Her execution, a spectacle of political expediency, silenced her voice but could not erase her impact. Through Elizabeth, Anne's vision for a reformed England endured, proving that even in death she remained a force to be reckoned with. Reflecting on Anne's story, we see a woman who defied the constraints of her time, only to be crushed by them. Her courage on the scaffold, her contributions to the Reformation, and her legacy through Elizabeth challenge us to reconsider the narratives of guilt and villainy that surrounded her. Anne Boleyn was not merely a victim of Tudor politics but a shaper of history, her life and death a testament to the enduring power of ambition, faith, and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The execution of Anne Boleyn on May 19, 1536, stands as a stark testament to the volatility of power in the Tudor court, where ambition could forge a queen and betrayal could destroy her. Anne's meteoric rise from a courtier's daughter to the consort who reshaped England's religious destiny was matched only by the swiftness of her fall, orchestrated by a king's fickle heart and a minister's ruthless cunning. Her death, under the blade of a French swordsman, was not merely the end of a life, but a moment that reverberated through history, exposing the fragility of favor and the cost of challenging a patriarchal world. Yet, in her tragedy lies a legacy that endures, embodied in the reign of her daughter, Elizabeth I, and the enduring reforms of the English Reformation. Anne Boleyn was neither the villain her enemies painted, nor the saint her admirers imagined, but a woman of remarkable intellect, courage, and conviction, navigating a treacherous landscape with agency and resolve. Her execution, a spectacle of political expediency, sought to erase her, but her influence proved indelible. Through Elizabeth's golden age, Anne's vision for a reformed England found fruition, her memory preserved in the triumphs of a daughter who bore her mother's fire. In the centuries since, Anne has transcended her time, her story a lens through which to explore the interplay of power, gender, and faith. Her tragedy, etched in the annals of history, reminds us that even in the face of betrayal and death, a single life can alter the course of a nation, leaving echoes that resonate across the ages.